Hello everybody, I'm Amit Pal and I'm the Communications Director of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. With me in the studio are my colleagues, FFRF attorney Sam Grover and FFRF legal fellow Colin McNamara. We're all here for another Facebook Live FFRF's Ask an Atheist conversation with you. We're here today to talk about and take your questions on the issue of the rights of secular prisoners. But first, we have an appeal for you. FFRF is on the forefront of many state church issues, and we often know about bad bills before you do. We are trying out a new way to be in contact with you. If you want to be in the loop and help us defend the separation of state and church, please text FFRF to 52886. We can't fight for the First Amendment without your help. Text and data rates may apply, but we can assure you that there will be no transfer of any money involved. The Freedom from Religion Foundation and Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, and that's what we are here to talk about today, filed an amicus brief in an appellate court earlier this week over discriminatory official treatment of a humanist inmate in Nevada. Now, Sam and Colin were the primary drafters of the amicus brief, and we'll spend our time today chatting about the case and the broader implications it has for the rights of secular folks, including prisoners' rights. If you'd like to join the conversation, feel free to ask your question right here on Facebook, or you can email your question to askanatheist@ffrf.org. Again, askanatheist@ffrf.org. So, Colin and Sam, fill us on the case in Nevada. What happened and why did we feel compelled to file an amicus brief on the behalf of a humanist prisoner?
Right, so this case actually goes really all the way back to 2014. This whole thing started when a humanist inmate at Lovelock Correctional Center in Nevada, a major correctional center, tried to form a humanist study group. There's all of the religious groups within the prison are allowed to form study groups. They also get all kinds of perks, like they can store their property in the chapel and they can have voluntary chaplains come in and talk to them. And he wanted to do that same thing for humanists. But what he was denied, well, really more accurately, he was just completely ignored. He was blown off for 2 years by the Nevada Department of Corrections. They weren't having it at all. And eventually, after 2 years of being completely ignored, AHA got involved and filed a lawsuit in October of 2016. And that's been winding its way through the district courts for the last 2 years about.
Can you spell out that acronym? By which group?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, AHA, the American Humanist Association, yeah.
And the district court ruled. What was the ruling?
Right, so it was one of the strangest ones I've seen, actually, because what happened was the judge in the case ruled on a motion that nobody was making at all. He sort of his own accord, just dismissed the case when no one was asking him to do that, actually. And in dismissing the case, his reasoning was that there's no way that this humanist prisoner can have a claim for discrimination here because humanism does not count as a religion for the purposes of the First Amendment. So he said that religion is the belief and reverence for a supernatural power accepted as the creator of the governor and governor of the universe. Where he got that definition from is anyone's guess because it really doesn't have any basis in law. There's a long-standing precedent that humanists and other non-theistic religions have protection under the First Amendment, but he just dismissed that and dismissed the whole case out of hand. So AHA filed an appeal in August, I believe, and then we joined in this amicus brief with Americans United for Separation of Church and State to back them up.
So folks may ask, why is this important? You know, from the perspective of secular people and humanists, what's so important about this? You know, our brief says, in the prison context, atheism, agnosticism, humanism, ethical culture, and Unitarian Universalism must receive the same constitutional protections as theistic belief systems. Now that goes some way in sort of toward explaining why it is indeed important, but can you sort of further explain that for our folks who are not of a legal background?
Sure, I'll jump in here. So the reason why FFRF got involved, the brief we filed is called an amicus brief. It's a friend of the court brief. So we're not directly involved in the lawsuit, but we wanted to weigh in on the side of the American Humanist Association because of the potential impact that this case would have on secular prisoners, non-theistic prisoners throughout the country. And well, why don't we start by just talking about what we actually argued that the district court's definition of religion implicates. If the district court's decision is upheld in this case, here's what we're arguing. The Nevada Department of Corrections and Lovelock Correctional Center will be able to continue to arbitrarily and unjustly deny Nevada's non-theistic inmates an equal opportunity to pursue beneficial group study and self-help. So that's sort of the central issue here is we raised this argument based on our experience working with secular prisoners throughout the country, that the ability to work as a group and discuss your shared beliefs and study what it means to be ethical, to be good without God, that's a huge benefit for secular prisoners. So, and we have some examples of that through our past work with in the Virginia Department of Corrections and also in South Dakota.
Right.
We've got a secular group that we've worked with in both of those places.
Right, and that's one of the arguments that we raised also, is that if Nevada and Lovelock are going to continue to deny humanists the right to organize and to discuss with each other and to be treated with the same respect that the theistic religions are treated with, they're out of step with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, for example, acknowledges humanism as a religion. We've largely through Sam's work, the Virginia Department of Corrections just last year acknowledges now both religious and secular humanism as being approved groups to operate within the prisons. They now have some very successful humanist groups at the prisons in Virginia. They get to celebrate the National Day of Reason and Darwin Day together, and they get to read together. We've actually donated a bunch of books to Coffeewood Correctional Facility in Virginia. I think we have a picture of Dan with those books as well.
Yeah, that's right. We actually, at this point, we've donated over 40 different books. There's Dan holding one set. We've donated over 40 Freethought books to 4 different secular groups within the prisons, and those include books like Losing Faith in Faith, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, Life-Driven Purpose, and The Good Atheist, all by our co-president Dan Barker, pictured there. Woe to the Women, The Bible Tells Me So, by Annie Laurie Gaylor, our other co-president. American Infidel by Robert Ingersoll, and a bunch of others. These books can be a lifeline for secular prisoners, those who might not otherwise have access to reading materials that can speak to them in how to lead a good life without worshiping a god.
Right. And that's the other big part of this too, is as our work kind of shows throughout prisons throughout the country, is there is demand for this. There's a lot of inmates that want to be able to do this, to be able to meet together and to discuss their beliefs or lack thereof. And Nevada is just bizarrely out of step in deciding that they just can't do that. And this judge's order from the district court is even more bizarrely out of step in trying to say that in order to get First Amendment protection, you need to believe in God, which just is not true.
Yeah, Sam, I mean, you read my mind in some sense, because I was going to ask you about the wonderful work you have done. In this instance, I think, FFRF is unique because we are combining activism on 2 fronts, which are probably the most difficult issues to work on. Secular rights and prisoners' rights. Yeah. And Sam Grover has, on our staff, has been the person who's been our point man and has, as Colin mentioned, brought about real change in a number of correctional systems on this particular issue. So that's been absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, we're currently working, well, Colin has taken over as point man on that issue. We do have a lot of other areas where, you know, we're battling state-church entanglement. But Colin is now primarily working on this, and we have a number of prisons we're currently working with. We regularly communicate with prisoners about religious promotion within the prisons. There's this line, right, that as a government entity, a state prison should not cross. There should be an accommodation of religious beliefs for religious prisoners and for non-religious prisoners, where they are free to worship as they choose and to congregate in order to celebrate their shared beliefs or their shared non-belief. But what we often find is that a lot of zealous prison officials go beyond that into actively promoting, typically Christianity, to all prisoners through things like prison baptisms and things like that, where, you know, what are you going to do if the warden of the prison that you're in says, hey, we're going to do this baptism and I would like you to be baptized, right? The prison officials have a coercive authority over the inmates in their charge. And a lot of inmates go through with religious exercises that they would rather not.
Right. To borrow the incredibly tired old pun, they are literally a captive audience. So,
that's a nice
but
one.
it's I can't take credit for that one. But that is the problem, is that there is that inherent, I mean, the prison officials literally hold these people's lives in their hands at that time. And if you're a prisoner and you think that playing to the CO's religion or playing to the warden's religion is going to get you preferential treatment, I think any reasonable person probably would do it. And I think this issue is actually connected to that larger issue too, because the First Amendment, not only, the Establishment Clause not only forbids the government from promoting and endorsing religion, it also forbids it from denigrating non-religion or denigrating non-theistic belief. And so really, yeah, this fight is sort of on two fronts. We do often, as Sam said, we do often work with overly zealous prison officials that are really trying to get people to come to Jesus, typically. Or at the same time, we're fighting to make sure that people who don't have any sort of mainstream religion or any theistic religion have the right to be able to express themselves and meet together and not be denigrated by the prison. So it's a two-front fight, and Sam's worked very hard at it for years, and now it's my turn.
Right. So let's sort of bring that back to this case, where we just we wrote this amicus brief, and what the district court judge sort of is saying in this case is that he respects the rights for religious inmates to have this ability to congregate and worship, but that right does not extend to non-theistic prisoners, right? In this case, it was a humanist prisoner. In another case, it might be an atheist prisoner. And that was a remarkable statement by this judge, because it really goes against over half a century of binding court precedent, well-established decisions by the Supreme Court and federal courts of appeals, saying that atheists and other non-theists, like humanists, are equally protected under the Constitution.
And so, Colin and Sam, what are the broader implications of this case, and what are we and the American Humanists Association and Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, what are we trying to achieve eventually?
Well, I think Americans United had a great statement on it that I think really covers it up quite well, that this judge's order is so out of step and it is so anachronistic. It has no basis in the current state of the law, that if that order were upheld and allowed to be the state of the law, we would be going backward in time. We mentioned in our brief, there was a case from 1890 or something like that, where the Supreme Court had said, because it was a common idea of religion at the time, that religion meant something supernatural. But that definition's been abandoned for a very, very long time. And the district court just decided to just wind the clock back for no reason. and to use it to deny people rights that are otherwise secured to them. So I think AU summed it up really well when they said that, you know, we want to see a world in which your belief or non-belief in God has nothing to do with the rights and privileges that you're afforded. And that is really, I mean, not to be too gloom and doom, I guess, but that is sort of really what's at stake in this case. It really does matter if the law is going to say, because you don't believe in a god or gods or some kind of supernatural deity, you don't get the rights and privileges that everybody else gets. That simply can't be the right rule. That cannot be the state of the law, and that's why we're so glad to have jumped in on this and been able to have our say to make sure that doesn't happen.
And regardless of our belief system, we should be all able to agree on that.
Yeah.
That is indeed an outrage.
Hope. Yes.
Right. I mean, it's become a common refrain for us in defending the importance of state-church separation. You can't have religious freedom in a country where the government is not free from religious endorsement, right? If the government is tied up in promoting one particular religion, no one's free to choose to worship or not worship as they choose.
Or promoting religion as a concept generally over not having a religion. I mean,
right.
Yeah. I mean, the Supreme Court specifically said this, that the First Amendment forbids the government from preferring one religion over another religion or preferring religion over the lack of religion. Both are equally barred by the First Amendment. And that's really what is at stake in this case. Whatever you want to call humanism, whether you want to call it a religion or whether you want to call it non-religion, doesn't actually matter, because the First Amendment forbids the government from preferring religion over religion or religion over non-religion. So the outcome's the same either way.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Colin and Sam, for that wonderful explanation and context. And now we'll be taking questions from our viewers on Facebook.
Sure. We've talked enough. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, so one question that I thought we might be getting here.
Here we go.
Let's see. Okay, Daryl Barker says, is there a case or one pending where a non-believer has been gagged in a private prison?
Literally or figuratively?
Gagged is in quotes, so sort of barred from practicing their beliefs or barred from being allowed to
private prison.
Right. So the private prison context would be a little bit different, but look, there's a principle where whenever a private entity has taken over a role traditionally given to the government.
Or the traditional government function.
A traditional government function. And I believe that taking care of prisoners would be a traditional government function. Whenever a private entity does that, they have stepped in and are fulfilling a government role, and so they're responsible for adhering to constitutional requirements, even as a private entity.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I don't know, to answer the question, I don't know of a specific case involving a constitutional violation of that specific nature in a private prison. I know the jurisprudence on private prisons is slightly hairier because there's certain types of claims you can't bring against them. This is getting so into the legal weeds, but you can't bring Bivens claims against private prisons, is my understanding. Right. And Google it if you want to know what that means. It's not particularly important. But yeah, you're right. The traditional government function test should apply to private prisons.
And prisoners in private prisons would retain their free exercise rights.
Correct.
And as we've been trying to explain, and as we explained in our amicus brief, those rights extend to the non-religious. Right. So an atheist in a private prison still has that right to speak about their non-belief and to speak with other prisoners about that non-belief.
Right.
Thanks, guys. I learned something new. I did not know, actually, that private entities, when they take over governmental functions, that even that principle that you spoke about, that applies to them.
Yeah,
so
there's a few different ways. There's a few different ways it can happen.
Yeah.
There's like, going back to law school. There's several different tests for when private entities can be considered essentially government actors for the purposes of the Constitution. Another common example is airports.
Yeah.
And that's due to more of an entanglement. It's that the government and the government interest and the private interest are so enmeshed that they're basically one. But the most common way you get it is through traditional government function, which is something like a prison, or police forces are another example of that. Yeah.
Great.
Right. All right. So we have more questions. Amy Williams asks, doesn't this case basically, or doesn't our brief, I suppose, basically amount to us declaring that atheism is a religion?
We were anticipating this question, so please go ahead.
So
do you want to say no, and then I'll say no?
Right. So no, there's an important distinction here. I don't think anyone would argue that atheism, which is a single belief or a single lack of belief in any god, that constitutes a religion in the way that we would normally talk about a religion. Yeah. But when you're speaking to a court, the way courts have said it is that atheism is a religion for constitutional purposes. Sure. And what's funny is that question doesn't even come up in the actual case where we wrote this brief.
That's true.
Because the prisoner who's trying to get equal access here was a humanist. And humanism is a religion, both for Establishment Clause purposes.
You gotta watch your air quotes. It's a religion for Establishment Clause purposes.
Right. And also it has tenets and a system of beliefs that track in a traditional sense to the way religions have beliefs.
Right. If you've careful observers will have noticed that throughout this whole thing, every time we say religion, we almost always air quotes it, and that's because we're not saying that atheism or that humanism are religions in the same way that the Abrahamic faiths are religions. Sure. But there is this long line of constitutional precedents, all these federal court decisions and Supreme Court decisions, that say that non-religion is protected to the same extent that religion is under the First Amendment. But of course, the First Amendment doesn't contain the word non-religion, it just contains the word religion. So the question is to determine, is something a religion for the purposes of the Establishment Clause, or as that term is used in the Establishment Clause.
Right.
And because that term has been taken to mean both religion and non-religion in the Establishment Clause, then we are, in effect arguing, yes, it fits that for the purposes of the Constitution, but no, atheism's not a religion. I'm sure this is not the last time we'll hear that question.
Right. Yeah.
Well, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Basically, religion is it's a term of art.
It is. It's a legal term of art.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a question from email asking, isn't it true that the majority of people in prisons are religious? If there aren't that many non-religious people in prisons, why does this type of thing matter? Don't we have bigger fish to fry? Like that,
Can I take that?
In God We Trust thing in Florida. So setting aside the In God We Trust thing in Florida for the moment.
Just want to say that we can and do multitask frequently. Yes. So don't count us out.
Got a lot of balls in the air.
Yeah, that's right.
We have been doing that, and
yes.
we've been active on the Florida front.
We're on that. Don't
yes.
worry. We're very good at multitasking.
Yeah, but back to the demographics.
Sure.
Non-religious people in prisons.
Right.
Are there any?
Yes, obviously. We know there's at least one, right? No, there are. I mean, there are more religious people in prison than non-religious people in prison, but you sort of expect that, right?
Unsurprisingly.
And that's not a dig against religion. That's just pure numbers. The most recent numbers that we've seen are that 24% of all Americans, all adult Americans, are non-religious, and the other, obviously, percentage, 76%, are religious. So you would expect there to be more religious people than non-religious people in prison. Obviously, that just tracks.
Certainly.
But no, I mean, if the question is, if there's not that many non-religious people in prison, who cares? I hope I'm not being uncharitable to the question by phrasing it that way. If there was at least one, it would matter, honestly. The Constitution, I mean, you'll hear this from us a lot, but the Constitution is specifically designed to protect the rights of minorities against a majority. So yeah, I mean, if humanists are a minority in prison, as they certainly are, that doesn't really weigh on the analysis. They're still entitled to the same rights, and someone needs to be the one standing up and saying that they are entitled to those rights and they deserve the same treatment and respect. And credit to the American Humanist Association for being the ones to bring this suit, and we're glad that we can play a part in it. Regardless
of whether you are religious or non-religious, I think it should it should freak everyone out to see the government trying to play favorites here and to take an individual prisoner's request to meet with like-minded prisoners to discuss his belief system, and the government saying, well, no, not that belief system. Like, you can't talk about that, but, you know, we're going to let these other people with a different belief system talk about their stuff. That's a theocracy, right? That's not what our country was founded on. And so that should freak everyone out, regardless of whether they're...
And, you know, to add to this, and I agree completely, and to add to the stats question, are there more religious people than non-religious people? Yes. But I'm willing to bet, and I'll put good money on this, that there are a lot more completely either non-religious, atheist, agnostic, humanist, what have you, non-theist people than there are some of the extremely small esoteric minority religions that do get protection.
Certainly.
There's... Sam and I were looking at the list just the other day, and I don't remember which state we were looking at, of their approved, you know, faith groups. That's what Nevada calls them. Every state has their own term for it, but there were some things we actually had never heard of on that list before. And sometimes, in a lot of these states, humanism's not one of them, but there are some religions. Yeah, there's the Virginia Department of Corrections one. I don't think we have any blow-ups of the more esoteric ones, but yeah, oftentimes they are, sure, they are established religions in the sense that they have a temple somewhere, right? And they have a holy scripture, and they have some clergy of some kind or another. But they might be extremely small in comparison to just the number of Americans that are non-religious altogether, and they are given more readily given protection by the TOCs because they more comfortably fall into what we recognize as you know,
well,
religion.
I'm of a Hindu family background, and I doubt there are that many Hindus in prisons, you know, but yet, as you said, it's given the same protection as Christianity and Islam and the more dominant religions.
And well, it's tough to get stats for the prison system as a whole.
Yeah.
Nationally, we know that atheists and agnostics outnumber Jews,
Yes.
Muslims,
Yes, absolutely.
Hindus, and Buddhists combined in this country.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, yeah, we're a significant minority group that is deserving of protection.
Absolutely.
Right. All right, we've got two more here. First from David Philpott. Sorry.
Hope that's right.
Are religious practices ever compulsory in prison? And in a similar vein, Billy M. asks, is there such thing as a Christian prison? Like how we have Christian hospitals. You know, prisons where inmates can be forced to pray.
Ooh. If you know of one, please write to us. I would love to write to them. I've never heard of such a thing. Have you?
A prison that says it's
a sectarian prison.
No. You know, what we have encountered actually quite often is halfway houses that do have a religious bent to them, that require parolees to worship and that sort of thing. And those operate in kind of a legal gray area. Basically, what it comes down to is the state can't condition anyone's release on them engaging in prayer or anything like that, or going to religious services. So if the state has an alternative system for parolees to enter into, then maybe that exclusively Christian one can also exist. But it's a tough situation, and I have yet to see one that operates effectively within the bounds of the law.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I agree. A really sectarian prison is probably not likely to happen because, as we just said, that's a traditional government function. If you tried to operate one, you'd get a knock on the door from us or somebody like us very quickly, shortly thereafter. But yeah, you're right. In the parole context, in the rehabilitation context, and like drug rehab, that kind of thing, you do tend to see more of that. And you're right, that's where it gets dicey. Sam and I have both worked pretty extensively on things.
We have challenged such
programs
in the past. Yeah.
Right. When we hear from people who say that, I got sentenced to, I got a DUI, and the judge told me that I have to go to AA. The only way for me to fulfill my sentence is to go to AA. AA is a religious program. It's basically, fair to say, it's pretty much beyond dispute at this point now. That AA is essentially religious.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Alcoholics Anonymous, yeah. I got to stop using acronyms. It's essentially considered now religious, basically, as a matter of law.
Sure.
It's just rife with spiritual stuff. So if you're being ordered to go to that, that is an Establishment Clause violation. And that's the kind of stuff we see more. It's more in the probation, in the drug rehab context, not so much in prisons themselves. But I reiterate my call. If anyone knows of such a thing, please tell me. I'd love to write about it.
FFRF co-president Dan Barker comments, Sunday school is a religious prison. So thank you, Dan, for that and insight.
No comment?
And we do have another question here from Wayne Sargent Smith, who asks, do any national humanist organizations actively advocate for acknowledgement? Do national humanist organizations advocate for being acknowledged or to be on an approved list in the nation's prison system?
Yes.
Yes, is the answer. So we are actively advocating to get atheists and agnostics recognized in prison systems around the country. We
did it once.
We had a success last year in the Virginia Department of Corrections, which now recognizes the rights for secular humanists.
And Sam's being humble, but it was Sam as the person who sort of was in the forefront of that.
Absolutely.
Yep. Working with the Virginia DOC, thanks to them as well for recognizing that needed to change. We're currently in contact with prisoners in a couple other states where they're having troubles getting organized as well for that same reason. Like if they're not on the list, then sort of mechanically prison officials are going to say, sorry, we can't help you, and that's a problem. So it should be recognized everywhere. The federal government, in a lot of other contexts at this point, recognizes humanists, atheists, agnostics for equal treatment.
Right. If you're an atheist soldier and you're killed in action and you're buried at Arlington Cemetery, you can get an atheist atom on your headstone if you want. Right.
Right.
I mean, the federal government has generally been a bit better about recognizing this, probably because a lot of this comes from federal law. The states, I guess, are still playing catch up to a certain extent, and that's the work that we're doing. But if the question was, are there national groups working on it? Yes, we are. Obviously, the American Humanist Association is doing great work. They've been very, very active in this context too. Help's on the way. We're doing everything we can across the board. Any other questions?
I think that's going to wrap it up for us. So,
all right.
Well, thank you for your questions. They were thought-provoking and incisive. Some expected, some quite unexpected. And join us again Wednesday next week for another Facebook Live, FFRF's Ask an Atheist conversation. And please don't forget to help us defend state church separation. Again, it's as simple as texting FFRF to 52886. Then we can reach out to you when we need help in your area. Text and data rates may apply again, but yet again, we are not engaging in any transfer of money. Well, thank you so much, Colin. Thank you so much, Sam. That was really enlightening, and I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers on Facebook did too. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Amit.